This episode of the Beaute Industrie podcast was brought to you by Dermatonic's Clear Skin Breakout Prevention Cream. Hello and welcome to the Beaute Industrie podcast, your online support community for the professional beauty industry. I am your host, founding director of Beaute Industrie, Tamara Shaw. Here we are closing the competitive gap and speaking your language. This is a platform created and dedicated to the professional beauty industry, valuing community over competition. We serve to help connect you with inspiration from industry experts, expand your knowledge through educational pieces, and bring you the latest in product and technology innovation. This is Beaute Industrie. Today, my guest is a Beaute Industrie family friend. She has appeared on the podcast in episode number 8, where we discussed how you can advance your consultations, and she is also a BI Pro expert in our online member community. Today, we're speaking with Donna Cummins-Campbell of the OR Academy. And if you don't already know Donna, she has worked in every aspect of the beauty industry for over 30 years and has been an educator in the beauty and dermal space since 1996. Donna has been instrumental in training many of today's educators and industry leaders and continues to provide first-class education with her own training facility, the OR Academy, and today we have stolen her beautiful mind for another episode of education to expand your knowledge. Today, Donna and I explore the skin condition acne and take a look at a more holistic approach to understanding this inflammatory skin condition. From the OR Academy, today we welcome Donna Cummins-Campbell. Donna, so nice to have you back on the podcast with me today. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for inviting me once again, Tamara. It's great to be here.
Donna, your first feature on the podcast was such a success that I knew we needed to have you back for more educational episodes. When we were discussing what topic you would cover, acne was suggested without hesitation. And I'm wondering, what is it about acne that makes it such a hot topic for discussion?
Definitely. Look, I do believe that acne is such a complex skin condition to treat. There's so many different types of acne, and it has an effect on an individual's self-esteem dramatically. So, you know, I think as estheticians, we can really make a difference. And I remember at one time I was working alongside a Melbourne dermatologist, and, you know, I was asking her about the effects of some of the medications that they were prescribing, you know, to their acne patients, and whether it, you know, impacted on their mental health. And she said, regardless of medication, so with or without the interference of medication, most of her acne patients suffer with varying levels of depression. So from an aesthetic or a skin therapist point of view, wow, you know, we make such a difference. So by actually understanding it a lot better and from a holistic approach is probably a great way of impacting, you know, their self-esteem and their self-worth.
And for that very reason is why I don't like when beauty therapists say, I'm just a therapist, because you are so much more than that word. And, you know, when we look at the word therapist, it really is treating mentally, physically, emotionally. There's so many different factors that you can pull on. And with acne, you're kind of pulling on all of those.
You definitely are, because it does really have so many complexities to it. And, you know, nowadays we really do need to future-proof our careers because, you know, we have so much more education available to us from a holistic point of view. We have brilliant educators. We have nutraceuticals that we're now, you know, prescribing in our clinics. So having that extra understanding is just going to work so much more efficiently and giving a holistic approach to the treatment of acne.
Yeah, you're 100% correct there. I'd love to start at the beginning of the condition. So what kind of factors can create the environment for acne to form in?
So when we take a holistic approach to treating acne and actually any other skin condition, we really should understand the root cause. So we need to understand from a systemic pathway. So when I'm looking at a skin condition, I have a typical cause and effect theory, and it includes 7 areas, holistic areas that I follow with most skin conditions. So I always start with nutrition, which then leads into gut health. That leads into hormones and other biochemical elements. We look at the elimination pathways, so your bowel and your lymph. Stress management, so we just mentioned, mental health concerns, systemic inflammation. Of course, we reach the skin, so they all have a knock-on effect. And I always liken it to, when you throw a pebble into a pond, that pebble has started that core ripple effect, and it sort of ripples outwards. That's very similar to how a holistic approach can be looked at, starting at that core, which generally is nutrition, and then expanding and moving outwards until you finally get to the area that we treat, which is the skin.
Isn't that interesting, though? From 7 points that you mentioned there, the body goes through 6 before we even see it topically. Yeah. So it really is an internal trigger.
It's internally driven, isn't it? So, this is why I believe I'm passionate about education. And, it's not just me. I see so many brilliant educators that we've got here in Australia, for instance, that are right into starting at that nutritional pathway and looking at how it can impact the skin. So it has to go through all of those different levels, if you like, before we actually get to see it.
Yeah, and I'd love to start with the number one thing you mentioned there, nutrition, because what I hear out in the clinics these days is a lot of therapists telling clients straight away to cut out dairy or cut out meat and, exclude entire food groups from what they are eating. Can you just dive a little bit deeper into that for me?
Well, so nutrition, we know that dietary inclusions will drive, a cellular level of health. So, of course, it's going to impact the skin. And we look at the chemicals that are broken down from the foods that we eat, and they have, from an acne point of view, we know that it has an impact on cellular differentiation. It has an impact on cellular proliferation, oxidative stress, glucose and lipid metabolism. We know that there's an increase in androgen receptor activation due to nutrition. The sebaceous lipogenesis, so, the structure and components of sebum. We know that the inflammatory cytokine expression can also be influenced by nutrition. So we do need to factor in some considerations with certain foods, and I'm certainly not excluding foods from anyone's diet unless they are qualified to do so. But we do consider hypoglycemic loading. So that's the carbohydrate load and how much sugar is either produced or consumed. So, when we have a diet high in refined carbohydrates, for instance, we know that the hypoglycemic loading can be quite high, and that can then drive skin conditions such as an acne. There is instances of dairy intolerance with acne. In some people, it's that high intake of dairy. Dairy contains leucine, which is an amino acid, and that has been known to drive an acne vulgaris, for instance.
And it's quite interesting, when we look at, even for myself, I've been in the industry now for 12 years. When I started, we weren't treating acne. There really was, not the same skins that we're seeing at the moment. And I think it does come back to that nutrition because everything is made by machines. We're adding in, preservatives and longevity ingredients and all of this kind of thing. And what we see in the supermarket, it's funny that there's one health food aisle, out of 14 or 15, which is, bananas. But nowadays, because of the nutrition, because of the sulfates and the colors and the flavorings and things like that, it really is impacting the skin. And nowadays, when I talk to therapists, they're saying that they treat more acne skins than anything. And that's across all landscapes of the industry, be that spa,
Yeah.
clinic, salon, whatever you're talking about. So there's a huge link there.
Well, it really goes to show, doesn't it, that is the, probably the cause is what they are consuming is going to start the process of that.
Yeah.
So yes, definitely, I agree with that. There's, it's convenient foods, foods that they can quickly prepare or purchase. So they're processed, and they will contribute to the hypoglycemic loading. They contribute to gut health and also the inflammation pathways.
When speaking about gut health, it's such a hot topic these days, number one. And once again, it comes through everything that we are eating, that, the gut is being overloaded by what we call simply bad bacteria, which is all of those, pollution molecules and the free radicals and everything else that we're eating, which is having a permeability effect on the gut, which we know, once again, quite simply, is having a leaking effect, for lack of a better term, into the bloodstream, which then we know the blood is transported all over the body and then actually supporting the skin. So it really is a huge knock-on effect with what we eat. And in the first episode that you and I recorded together, we talked about advancing your consultations. And that was a huge topic you talked about, in that you can't just have a look at your client's consultation and say, right, well, you're eating okay, fantastic, and move on to the next question. You really do have to ask your client, describe for me your 3 main meals. If you're having 3 coffees, are you having milk? What kind of milk are you having in those coffees? And really deep dive that kind of nutrition and internal pathways, which I guess comes on to the third point in terms of hormones. Can you just deep dive that for us in terms of, like, what specific hormones are we talking about, and how maybe are they spiked to have that link with acne?
Sure. So as we know, there's, a hormonal influence with acne, but there's other chemical elements as well that we need to look at as well. So the hormones, obviously, it's androgen driven condition or disease. So testosterone, which is an androgen, as we know, it will convert to dihydrotestosterone through the 5-alpha reductase enzyme pathway. So, DHT or dihydrotestosterone is 10 times stronger than testosterone. So, if you look at what testosterone, does, it increases sebum production. It changes the lipogenesis of sebum as well. So you end up with a more viscous sebum production. It's going to drive the acne condition. So that's one hormone. The estrogen progesterone ratio, incidentally, is also needing to be considered, because we know that when there's a higher or an imbalance to the ratio, that can also drive an acne condition. DHEA, which is produced by the adrenal gland, it's dehydroepiandrosterone, that actually will produce make hormones such as testosterone and estrogen. So when we're talking about that testosterone influence, then if there's more testosterone there to convert, then there's going to be a more androgen response to the acne, to drive the acne. Cortisol is another hormone as well. The stress hormone. And never before have we been in such a stressful state in our lives than, in the modern world. So we know that cortisol will impact that as well. And the other chemical elements that I tend to talk about in the acne holistic approach is forkhead box 1, or FOX1 for short. Now, that's a transcription factor. And what the transcription factor will do is it corrects the DNA sequence. So we actually need to have FOX1 in our cells. If there is a deficiency of FOX1, which is regulated by, suppressed by insulin, it can also be suppressed by other elements as well. But what we see is this is one of the deficiencies that we will see in a skin condition and other diseases as well. So that's a transcription factor because we want it to find the correct DNA sequence. So, of course, if there's not enough FOX1, the correct DNA sequence is flawed. Another element that I always talk about is a protein kinase. mTORC1 is the protein kinase. And what these guys do is they regulate cell function. So in the instance of FOX1 being deficient, you'll see an increase of mTORC1. You'll also see an increase of mTORC1 with high dairy consumption. So, and there's studies on that to show that that is driven by dairy. And again, I'm not taking out foods necessarily, but I'm being mindful of some of the drivers of this condition. You'll see an increase with the increase of mTORC1. You'll actually see an increase in the keratinocyte proliferation. And of course, the incidence of comedone genesis is higher when we see an increase of mTORC1. And then, of course, the other one that I always link to an acne is a growth factor. It's insulin-like growth factor 1. So this is produced when there's a high sugar-based diet or a consumption of refined carbohydrates. The levels increase when there's a FOX1 deficiency. And what this will do is it will increase testosterone and DHEA production. So there's lots of, not only hormones, but other chemical elements as well that we need to look at from a holistic point of view.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that there are so many different hormones, and I guess something that, everything comes back to nutrition, really, when we look at the chicken that we used to eat being a tiny little chicken compared to the chicken that you might find in Costco, which looks like a chicken on steroids because it literally is a chicken on steroids. We are eating more. We want bigger things. We want the chicken to be white. We don't want a grey chicken from the thigh, for example. So we are pumping in hormones, which we as humans are eating, traveling through the pathway. And if we already have that high balance or an imbalance rather of hormones and we are eating all of these foods, we are just really pumping up that hormone intake. And something that is quite interesting for women, we go through so many hormones, and even on a daily basis, our hormone and our mood really can up and down multiple times. And I guess for us, we start at that kind of pre-teenage where we're going through menstruation. We then go through the growth phase of kind of that 15 to 18 where we're developing breasts and hips and everything like that. Then we come into pregnancy. You might have 2 or 3 babies, so we're breastfeeding the whole time. And then we come and we go through menopause.
Yeah, exactly. So many fluctuations.
We really don't. Yeah. And we don't have that chance to kind of relax in our hormones. So if we are adding in all of these other things, that can certainly stimulate it. But it's interesting what you say there in that hormone and stress have a real link. And, as you were saying, we are so busy. Even this morning when we got on the call off the record and you said, how are you? And I responded straight away, busy, and it's like we're almost in this constant flight or fight mentality. And that is really when we start to have that kick on with the adrenals. And so we get that cortisol release, the corticotropin releasing hormone, which then is going to have a knock-on effect with this type of sebum that we produce. So
and it drives the inflammatory cascade as well, that systemic inflammation.
Correct.
It will drive that as well.
Yeah, so just based on the lives that we are living, there are so many different pathways, and this is why the consultation is so important, because you cannot just see a skin and go straight for an exfoliant. And I want to ask you more about that, because that's something that I see time and time again when, a therapist may have done a really great consultation. I'm not knocking the consultations, but we're still going straight to peels or straight to, something that's just going to strip the skin. And for me, that's not always my first point that I treat with, but I'm wondering what your opinion is on that.
I guess from what we've just discussed, you can see that this is just, it's really not going to target the acne. It's going to target perhaps the poor keratinocyte compaction. But what about the root cause? What is actually taking place before we see the acne? And I certainly don't think that, peeling the skin is the be-all and end-all, and that certainly has its place. But it's not for everyone either, There's a lot of times where it's really driven from what we've just mentioned. So by considering those, and I'm not saying that you need to all of a sudden become a nutritionist or a holistic practitioner, but by understanding that, then you're able to, and I think we mentioned this in that first podcast, that you're able to network with, these specialists in the industry that can also help your client with the result that they're after.
And I really, really resonate with what you're saying there is don't go out of your scope. And I think this is where it gets really tricky and grey in the industry, because we might see a skin and think immediately, okay, that skin needs zinc, but we cannot, as beauty therapists alone, exactly, we cannot suggest to our client, go down to the nearest chemist and take zinc, because we know that, one, we're not prescribers, two, that client's going to go self-diagnose, and three, there are even more links now saying that if we overflood the body with synthetic chemicals and synthetic vitamins, that it has a knock-on effect with other natural chemical pathways in the body. And so always coming back to treating with whole foods and, fibers and things that we can actually say that isn't going to overflood the body with a certain vitamin and then have that knock-on effect. So whole food powders, for example, is something that I always love to go to.
After the break, Donna shares with us the benefits of lymphatic drainage, internal health, and ingredients we should always use when treating acne. But first, speaking of ingredients, here is a message from our sponsor. As you know, today's episode is all about acne, and in saying that, I'm wondering if you're looking for a more natural alternative for your clients with acne-prone skin. Dermatonic's Clear Skin Breakout Prevention Cream is a personal favourite of mine and is packed with natural actives such as arnica, rosemary and ginger, which are all key for fighting bacteria. I found that not only did it help reduce my hormonal acne, but also reduced inflammation, helping to repair the skin's barrier and hydrate at the same time. To find out more, email info@dermatonics.com.au. And now, back to the episode.
I'm wondering if you can expand for us, for people who may not know, or maybe they're in their first couple of years of treating acne, there are a few different grades. And so sometimes it is okay to go straight to exfoliant, for example, a grade 1 or 2, but then maybe if you're seeing a grade 3 or 4, there are other options for us to travel to first.
So, I mean, as we get to the skin and we start looking at, okay, what are we going to perhaps use to target the skin, what the symptoms are expressing on the skin, you really need to, have a look at, okay, the grade of acne. And as we know that there's depends on who you talk to, there's four main grades of acne. The first two obviously are more minor or mild than the last two. And in some cases, we see a lot, particularly I think in females, we see an acne that doesn't necessarily mean that it's an oily acne. It's been produced by that imbalance to hormones, and it could also come down to the cosmetics that they're currently using as well. But the whole skin surface is imbalanced, and as we know, if there's an impaired barrier function, we get an impaired skin microbiome, and your skin microbiome is just so crucial for a healthy skin. But if you keep using harsh ingredients such as your acids, if they're too strong, as in a pH too strong, then you may constantly be impairing that barrier function, which is going to have the knock-on effect with the skin's microbiome. So, there's definitely some skins that you need to be able to determine, okay, does this skin suit having acids, or should I be actually looking at other areas first? I like to incorporate more retinoids in an acne skin because they'll improve the cellular differentiation and they improve the keratinocyte retention issues that an acne skin will have. So, retinoids to me would probably be more suitable in many cases than going straight to the big guns of the acids.
Interesting you say that, because I'm on the same pathway as you in terms of aligning with 4 grades of acne. And I guess when we look at grade 1 acne, it's almost like that. I won't call it simple because sometimes it can be a little bit more complex than that, but it's non-inflammatory. So you are looking at your comedones and your few papules, versus your grade 2, you might be looking at comedones, papules, and then you've got the pustules as well. So you're starting to see that inflammation come through, whereas grade 3, you've got
more
large inflammatory papules, pustules, perhaps even cysts, and that also can travel down to the neck as well, and the décolletage, whereas grade 4, it's like your nodules really severe, and you've got lots of inflammation here, which can be really, really painful. And so I love what you're saying there, in that, when you've got a lot of inflammation, you can't go straight to your AHAs and your real salicylics, for example, because it can we need to anti-inflammatorise, and I'm wondering if you can go into that a little bit further in terms of that inflammation. Why do we see that? How can we counteract that in a treatment room?
So the skin inflammation in those, type 3 and type 4, it's really a good indication that there are bacterial influences in the skin. It also gives us a great indication that there is systemic inflammation as well that might be driving this. And then the byproducts of your bacterial metabolism, they produce inflammatory cytokines. So that's when we start to see pus and things like that. So that whole inflammatory cascade is driven by what's happening internally, and that's when we start to see in those type 3 and type 4 grade acnes, a lot more inflammation. It travels down the lymphatic system, and there's a lot of pain associated with that, and of course then it's the deeper seated lesions within the skin that can also then cause tissue damage.
Isn't that interesting? And we were talking before about comedones, papules, pustules. I guess for anyone who may be a little bit more visual or isn't quite familiar with the different types of acne, do you mind just going into that for me?
So as the grade 1 acne is usually just mainly comedones, either open or closed. So closed comedones being that the stratum corneum is covering the follicle, and then the open comedome is more exposed to the environment or oxygen, so it oxidizes and you get that black plug. So that's your typical blackhead. So they're often found in your stage 1 acne, and it can be mixed with a couple of pustules, but not a large percentage. Once we go up into grade 2, you'll see a larger percentage of pustules forming in larger areas of more regions of the face, neck and décolleté, and even the back area as well. And then, of course, grade 3, grade 4, that's when we start to see the cystic or nodular acne, and a lot more inflammation deeper in the skin.
Yeah, perfect. And so what is a papule versus a pustule?
So a pustule is when we see the presence of pus, and that's because we have that break in the follicle. The follicle ruptures in the follicle. The debris found in the follicle is then spilling into the dermal layer, and we get the whole immune reaction. Then the lymphatic system starts bringing in the white blood cells, and then we see, the presence of the presence of pus in a pustule, whereas a papule is more about the inflammation. It hasn't yet ruptured. It could rupture, but it's more inflamed around the hair follicle.
And I guess this is exactly the reason why we tell our clients not to pick and pop. I think as therapists, we often tell them, stop picking and popping your pimples, but we don't tell them why.
Yeah.
And as we all know, it's really satisfying sometimes to get them.
But, and now there's a channel that's actually dedicated to it. So.
Yes, Dr. Pimple Popper. But I guess if we explained to our client that, look, when we do see a papule or a pustule and we go to pop it, when you actually are popping it, you're rupturing that little pore or that follicle. And so you're actually stretching it and making that area more malleable. And then we are left with open pores on the skin. And that's another client concern.
Yeah.
But when we squeeze something and perhaps we feel a break, but it doesn't come to the surface of the skin, what we're most likely doing is actually breaking
underneath
the follicle wall, and then it's spreading like a little tunnel under the skin. And that's why when you pop one, the next day his little best friend pops up next to him.
And also, if they're squeezing and nothing's coming out, what they're probably doing is pushing it right down to the bottom of the follicle, and it will then rupture. So the next day they wake up and, then we have the presence of a pimple. So because they've ruptured it in the dermis, they've pushed it so far with pressure, not to mention that they've probably used, filthy fingers to do that, adding more bacteria to it. So yes, look, I always will say to an acne client that if they've got something that needs to be extracted, then go to the clinic, because it can be done under the, if it's able to be extracted, then it needs to be done under sterile conditions with the right method as well. But, if I do say to therapists, if you are not confident or you do not understand what's happening, then you don't do it.
Yes, great advice. I want to talk about lymphatic drainage, because lymphatic drainage is my life. I think we don't do enough of it. I think at the moment we're probably 3 years behind where we need to be. There are some fantastic lymphatic drainage specialists out there, body and face, but I think we really need to do more of it in terms of skin treatments and treating lymphatically. Can you explain for me how and why and what is lymphatic drainage and how that can actually assist with acne?
I'm glad you've said that, because I'm actually working with a lymphatic specialist at the moment, and on a facial program actually. So I'm glad that you've said that, because I agree, we don't do it enough. And when treating an acne, and I mentioned the elimination pathways, you've got the bowel elimination, but you've also got the lymphatic pathways that need to be working effectively. And when we have an acne skin condition, the immune system is constantly working, and it can become quite lethargic if it's working overtime. And in fact, a lot of us have poor immune systems because of our lifestyle and our diet as well. So the immune system has to be considered with an inflamed skin condition. And when the lymphatic system is overworked and sluggish, then it's not going to eliminate any of the toxic load. So, so utilising the lymphatic drainage techniques will always help with this skin condition, because we want to improve inflammation and the blood supply to the skin, but we also need to make sure that we do eliminate lymph congestion.
Yes. And so simply put, for those who maybe haven't looked into lymphatic drainage as of yet, it's almost, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's almost like the body has its own detoxification pathways, but that detoxification pathway doesn't have its own pump.
You have your blood network, and then you have your lymphatic network, and they work, parallel. So your blood network, your circulatory system, is governed by, the pump, the biggest pump that we have, which is our heart. So, we get blood pumping around, otherwise we wouldn't be alive. But our lymphatic system is relying on muscle movement. So, again, if you look at our lifestyle, we're a lot more sedentary in our lifestyle. So therefore our lymphatics are not getting the movement through muscle movement, and they become stagnant, and that's when we start to see lymphatic congestion.
And they do say nowadays that sitting is the new smoking.
I've heard that too. It's really good.
I
like that association, that it is. It's now, it's bad for our health.
Yes, absolutely. And one thing that's great about the industry at the moment is we're recognizing more traditional practices, and this is years and years and years ago, of the gua sha treatment for lymphatic drainage, or just typical kind of pressure point massage during the facial, rather than using a really heavy cream to European massage and make it all flowy and increase blood, or actually just really pressing out along those kind of lymphatic pathways to the nearest lymph node, so then we can excrete that out at a later date.
And that's exactly right. You're acting, really, the movements that we are doing, we're mimicking muscle movement that is normally meant to help with lymphatic drainage. So by incorporating some of those techniques, whether it's gua sha or just with your hands doing, following the lymphatic drainage pathway, then that's what you're doing. You're mimicking the muscle movement that we would normally be doing in a day-to-day exercise, just walking, but unfortunately when you're not doing that, then of course something has to back up, and that's going to be your lymphatic system, and it does become congested as well.
I remember actually sitting in on a class once, and the educator said you only need 30 minutes of walking a day to actually pump that system. So I guess when we're talking to clients in the consultation and we're asking, are they active or are they sedentary in their lifestyle, we don't have to put them down and say, oh, you're not moving at all, because, you might be doing, 3Ks, for example, around the house, or just in small little jogs, or even vacuuming. Gosh, I've got a 2-story townhouse, and vacuuming, going up and down those stairs.
It's good exercise,
is being active. Yeah, exactly. So I guess just getting that into your clients, understanding that when we're asking about exercise, it doesn't always have to be, I'm going to F45 and I'm doing CrossFit, and all of these really strenuous group workouts. It can literally just be a 30-minute walk.
It can be really just simply that. You're right. It could just be that you get the vacuum out and, do a thorough vacuum clean. If you've got, a house that's, bigger, then of course that might be the full 30 minutes. But, adding little things like that. I actually had a patient just recently, and she has several health concerns. And when I sat down and sort of asked her, what do you do for exercise? And she was an older person. She said there's some days where she gets out of bed and she just goes and sits on the lounge. Now, there's a lot of other implications with that, with mental health and things like that. And I said, wow, even if you could just do a walk for 15 minutes, start off with 15 minutes, build up to 30 to 40 minutes. Well, I just got a phone call from her last week. She said, you're not going to believe it, I'm walking every day. And just even the clarity of mind was so improved, but also all of the edema that she was suffering with has gone. And, it's not a skincare related case, but it does go back to, you do need to move for health.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And exactly as you said, they're coming back to that tie-in with the mental and the emotional. We know how much oxygen can travel around the brain when we do move. And if your client who you're treating with acne is suffering from anxiety or depression or low mood, then just having that 30-minute walk can do so much for their mental state as well.
Well, I certainly know that when I've done some exercise, I feel better. I do feel that I have more clarity and I feel good about myself. So, I'm sure that impacts other people as well.
Yeah, it's that endorphin
right.
release. And when we're talking about skin, I'd love to ask you your go-to ingredients topically when you're treating acne.
So I mentioned retinoids before, and I guess that they're probably key because they improve cellular differentiation. And I guess another one would be niacinamide or vitamin B3. That helps improve the skin's barrier. It improves the corneocyte compaction. It reduces chill. It modulates the skin's immune system. It improves the skin's barrier. So therefore you're getting an improvement with the skin's microbiome and a regulation of your commensal bacteria profile. Also antioxidants, topical antioxidants, not to mention internal as well, but definitely antioxidants. Physical sunscreen. So your zinc is a really preferred sunscreen to use. I believe that it's anti-inflammatory as well. So in the case of an acne skin, I think that's a great way to protect the skin, and it doesn't form. It's not comedogenic. It's not going to contribute to the acne as well. Incidentally, sunscreen ingredients, and this is more to do with your chemical absorbing ingredients. They're known to alkalize the skin. So as we know that the skin is a mild pH, and so therefore if we have more of an alkalizing effect from sunscreen ingredients, then the desquamation process of the corneocytes is impacted. So in some cases, acids can be useful to reacidify the skin and to assist with that desquamation process. And when I say acids, I mean at quite a high pH, of around 4.1, because you don't want to disrupt the skin's barrier too much, but you want to use something that can reacidify the skin. And as we get older, our skin actually becomes more alkaline as well.
Interesting. And I love how you've said there about your comedogenic ingredients, because I think sometimes we forget that as therapists. And if you see these days, you walk into a department store, you walk into a cosmetic store, there are so many products. And, really, once again, when I first started in the industry, there was no such thing as a primer. You didn't put primer on your skin before you did makeup. But now we're doing these heavy, really beautiful show and stage and TV and film makeups that we do need a primer. But I guess having a look at what your client is using cosmetically, and in consultations, I always love to tell my clients, bring everything you were using on your skin, bring your makeup bag, bring your skincare bag. And I guess when we're having a look at that comedogenic ingredients, it is things like coloring. And if you see that kind of acne on the cheekbone or just underneath the cheekbone, if it's not an internal disruption and you can't quite put your finger on it, I would be asking your client, what kind of bronzer are you using? What kind of brush are you using? And the silicones in primers, the talc, the mineral oils, even something I know is trending hugely. And this is a bit of a debate, so I might rock some people's boats here, but coconut oil.
Yes.
On the surface of the skin, so many people are telling me I'm using it as a pre-cleanse to, take my makeup off, or I'm sleeping in it. And in my eyes, it's just something that is so comedogenic.
And I also saw on a forum just recently that someone was singing the praises of coconut oil as a sunscreen. I just went, oh, no.
Oh, wow. That's just,
look, it's high.
We won't go into that. We'll have a conversation for days,
exactly.
won't we?
But it's high in oleic acid, which is comedogenic. So, keep your coconut oil for definitely your diet, not necessarily on the skin.
And I guess doing a full circle, we did mention nutrition and having those eating habits with your client. And I'm always mindful during my consultations to use the word eating habits rather than what's your diet, because I don't want to go on a diet and I can imagine my client doesn't either. But I'm wondering then, what kind of foods can we tell clients at home that they can increase, that they can actually help their own acne internally?
Well, I think it's fair to say that if you just generalise, because again, we can't go and change our client's diet unless qualified. So sticking within the scope, you would certainly be okay in suggesting that they eat a plant-based diet. And when I say a plant-based diet, I don't mean a vegan or vegetarian diet. You certainly do need to include healthy proteins, healthy fats. So including lots of plants in your diet. Now, they contain not only the nutrients or vitamins, minerals, they contain soluble and insoluble fibres. And these can act as prebiotics, so they make that whole gut health a friendly environment to allow for the growth of your commensal bacteria, your healthy bacteria. But it also improves the bowel elimination process, and it's in making sure that they're getting their sources of nutrients from whole foods. So you mentioned before that supplementation is proving to be an issue. So there's nothing wrong with eating a whole food plant-based diet to help with any health and skin condition. From a nutritional point of view, I do look at minimising or even eliminating the intake of dairy. Now, that may not be forever. It's just because of that leucine that drives those biological elements that I mentioned before. Definitely eliminating or minimising refined and processed carbohydrates. They don't have any nutritional value to them anyway, and they increase insulin-like growth factor 1, which I mentioned before. That will increase the production of testosterone or DHEA from the adrenals. And of course, making sure that they drink at least 2 litres, up to 3 litres is perfect, of water, of filtered water, to help with the elimination pathways.
And it's interesting that you mentioned there the prebiotics. I think pre and probiotics is a huge topic in our industry at the moment. And we will have an upcoming episode on gut health where we really deep dive that. But it's quite interesting that now we're seeing lots of drinks like your kombucha and your kefir and things like that. But I do just want therapists to be mindful of the sugar that is in them, because they're not all made equally. And just basically when you look at the back of a label, and I don't encourage anyone to calorie count or anything crazy like that, but when you see sugar and the number, if you see 4 grams of sugar, that's actually 1 teaspoon.
Exactly.
So if you have a drink and it's got something like 16 grams of sugar, that's 4
teaspoons of
sugar in that one drink, and it's so crazy. So kombucha is amazing, kefir is amazing, don't get me wrong, but just have a look at that. And if we could, ferment our own foods and make pickle kings and sauerkraut and beautiful Greek yogurt, that is actually the best form of pre and probiotic that you can get.
Exactly. And, incorporating all those plants on a daily basis, because you want those fibers to be that prebiotic, so that your probiotics that you're having in your fermented foods is able to work positively for gut health.
And Donna, we have just covered the tip of this acne iceberg. You and I could talk all day. However, you have an online program at the AWE Academy, which really kind of expands this topic, and obviously all of our guests can get so much more insight and information and education through there. Can you point us to where that might be
Sure.
found?
If you go to the website or Academy, AWE Academy, we have currently we've got 5 modules, 2 on holistic aesthetics, 1 on the acne, which we've just covered today. And I go into that a little bit more in depth with those 7 areas that I always look at. And of course, we'll be growing as well with those modules as well. So they're all online based at this stage. I'm happy to do workshops as well if that makes it easier. I just need to have a minimum number of people that I can do the workshop with. I do a lot of in-clinic training as well, so if anyone's interested, and it helps with understanding the holistic approach, because then it becomes a lot easier to translate into what nutraceuticals, what skincare products, and of course what treatment modalities may work best with those skin conditions. So all my contact details are actually on the website at www.aweacademy.com.au.
Brilliant. And we'll make sure that we link all of that information and your acne modules in the show notes so people can have a little look further if they're wanting to continue the studies.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I always say that knowledge is power. So the more we know, the more powerful we are and the better we can help our clients. So
Thanks so much, Tamara. Thanks for inviting me again.
I once read a quote that said you can never be overdressed or overeducated, and it has stuck with me ever since. Even if you are the most experienced or highly qualified therapist, there are still always opportunities to learn and expand on your education. If there are more educational episodes that we can bring to your ears, please jump into our Facebook community group by searching for Beaute Industrie and let us know, because we want to keep bringing you topics that resonate with you and that you're interested in hearing. Along with our Facebook group, you can also find us on Instagram at Beaute Industrie or myself at Tamara Shaw Reid. And if you ever feel so inclined and love today's episode, please do share it across your social media channels and give us a 5-star rating, because that's how we will know that you are loving the content. Until next time, stay connected.